A dinner to die for, and someone did. Welcome to Faded Echoes. I'm your host, Ombra. Tell me where you're listening from. This growing community means so much. Hearing from you always adds flavor to the mystery. Let's begin. I'll admit right up front that I've never liked lunch meetings. Not because I'm opposed to food. It's one of the few subjects where Wolfe and I can share mutual respect. But because a lunch meeting usually means someone else's problem trying to sneak onto our plate. That Thursday, the problem walked in wearing a white coat, a chef's toque tucked under his arm, and a face that looked like it had been basted in worry for hours. Fritz was the first to spot him. He'd come up from the kitchen with a spoon still in his hand, which was enough of a signal that the visitor had credentials worth noticing. "Archie," Fritz said, "this gentleman says he must speak to Mr. Wolfe about a matter of cuisine and conscience." The combination was irresistible to Fritz, but to Wolfe it sounded like an ambush. Wolfe, who was seated at his desk pretending to study gastronomie pratique, but in truth was counting the number of interruptions since breakfast, didn't look up. "Conscience," he repeated. "Pfui, send him away, Fritz." "Please, Mr. Wolfe," the chef blurted, stepping forward. "My name is Etienne Leclerc. I'm head chef at Le Régent. Something has been done, something unforgivable, and I cannot trust the police with it." That got Wolfe's eyes up, only barely, but up. "Unforgivable?" he said. "There are few crimes that deserve that adjective. Murder, perhaps. Or the misuse of tarragon." I couldn't resist. "Those are close in severity, I suppose." Leclerc's hands trembled around his hat. "Someone has murdered a dish, Mr. Wolfe. My creation, my menu." I waited for Wolfe to explode, or at least to dismiss the man with his usual blend of disgust and disdain. Instead, he sat very still, eyes half-lidded, like a cat deciding whether to bother with a canary. "Your menu," he said softly. "Elucidate." Leclerc took a breath that looked like it might snap him in half. "A week ago, we premiered a new tasting course. My design, my signature, every detail balanced. But 2 nights later, a critic wrote a review that destroyed it. He accused me of theft. Said I stole the recipes from a rival. The proof appeared in his column, identical dishes, names, plating. But Mr. Wolfe, I never saw those dishes before. Someone leaked my notes, my photographs, everything. Someone inside my kitchen betrayed me." I whistled low. "A culinary whodunit. You've come to the right pantry." Leclerc looked at me, desperate. And yesterday, the rival chef who supposedly invented my dishes, he was found dead, poisoned. The police are circling me like vultures. That made Wolfe's eyelids twitch. "Poison," he repeated. "You're accused of plagiarism and homicide. The connection is evident." Leclerc nodded miserably. "They say I silenced him to cover my theft, but I swear to you, I am innocent. The truth is in my kitchen, not in the police's imagination." Wolfe leaned back, the creak of the chair as deliberate as a sermon. "Archie?" "Yes, sir." "Get the details. The critic's name, the rivals, the date of death, and the menu." Leclerc blinked. "You will take my case?" "I will consider it," Wolfe corrected. "Food, Mr. Leclerc, is art in the most fragile medium. To falsify it is desecration, but to waste my time with hysteria is worse. Archie will determine which you are." That meant I was on the hook. I guided the trembling chef out of the office, past the globe stand and the rows of orchids that looked better fed than most humans. When I came back, Wolfe was glaring at the door as if Leclerc's footsteps had scratched the parquet. "A chef," he said, "and a corpse. Fritz will be insufferable." I grinned. "You're interested." He closed his book. "Perhaps. But only because appetite, like guilt, has a flavor that cannot be imitated." And just like that, lunch was ruined and business was back on the menu. When I got back from seeing Leclerc out, Wolfe was still in his chair, pretending to read but actually listening to the faint noises from the kitchen below. I could tell he was thinking. He had that particular stillness that meant his brain was busy dissecting something invisible. "Fritz," he said at last, without raising his voice. "Yes, sir," came the answer from below, soft but eager. "Bring coffee, and something edible. A small plate." "Small?" I repeated. "That's a new one." He flicked me a look. "Do not be impertinent, Archie. This morning's disturbance has unsettled the air." I grinned and leaned against the desk. "You're saying a chef's nervous breakdown ruined your digestion?" "I'm saying," he replied, "that professional incompetence is contagious. We must inoculate ourselves." I let him have that one. "So, what's the next move? I take it I'm heading to Le Régent?" He nodded once. "Yes, before the police contaminate what remains of the truth. You will obtain a copy of the critic's column and identify the rival chef who is now deceased. Determine the method of poisoning, if known. Speak with the staff. Observe. Do not interrogate. The guilty will expose themselves by habit, not confession." That was as close to encouragement as I ever got. Fritz arrived with the coffee and a small plate of sausage patties so delicate they looked like they'd been made with tweezers. Wolfe sipped and nodded, satisfied, and I took that as my cue to exit before he found a way to make the assignment sound like a moral lecture. By 2 o'clock, I was standing in front of Le Régent. It was the kind of restaurant that charged for confidence, not calories, mirrors, marble, and enough silverware on each table to perform surgery. The maitre d', a tall fellow with the facial elasticity of a department store mannequin, tried to block me until I dropped Leclerc's name. That opened the gate just enough for me to slide through. The kitchen, when I reached it, was an organized panic. Stainless steel everywhere, clattering pans, and a smell that could have paid its own rent. Leclerc's sous chef, a slim woman with sharp eyes and sharper cheekbones, gave me the once-over. "You're not from the police," she said. "Not unless they've changed the uniform to wool suits and charm." She didn't smile. "Then you must be the detective. He said you'd come." "Name?" "Clara Vance. I'm second here. Or I was before the chaos." She wiped her hands on a towel, leaving streaks like claw marks. "Everyone's been questioned. They say Chef Etienne stole from Gustave Perrin, and now Perrin's dead. They'll shut us down next." "Let's not get ahead of the closing credits," I said. "You knew Perrin?" "Of course. Everyone in the city's food world knew him. He was talented, arrogant, and a terrible drunk. But theft? No. Leclerc couldn't copy another man's recipe if you handed him a blueprint." "Any idea how Perrin died?" "Cyanide. In a sauce. They say it happened at his own restaurant during prep. It must have been deliberate. He didn't just swallow that by mistake." That little detail earned a note in my pocketbook. Poison in food. Too poetic for coincidence. I made my way around the kitchen, pretending interest in the decor while watching faces. The pastry chef avoided my eyes. The line cooks whispered when I passed, and one waiter, a slick-haired type with a smirk that came pre-installed, gave me the kind of look that says he had opinions but preferred to auction them off. His name turned out to be Julian March, head waiter. He claimed to have seen everything and believed nothing, which made him either useless or very useful depending on how Wolfe wanted to play it. "Tell me about the night before the review," I said. Julian shrugged. "Same as always." The chef tested the new menu. The critic, Mr. Mortimer Vale, was dining at table 3. Alone, taking notes between bites. He left early, didn't even finish the final course. 2 days later, his review dropped like a brick. "Any staff missing since then?" He hesitated, then leaned closer. "One. Dishwasher. Name's Peter Krosky. Vanished the morning after Perrin died. No notice, no paycheck. But no one misses a dishwasher." "I do," I said. "They have a habit of seeing things others don't." By the time I wrapped up my rounds, I had a notebook full of names, times, and enough contradictions to make Wolfe purr. Back at the brownstone, he was finishing his third cup of coffee and scowling at a stack of menus Fritz had brought up as reference material. "Well?" he asked. I gave him the rundown: Leclerc, Perrin, the critic Vale, and the missing dishwasher. He listened with his eyes closed, fingers steepled like a cathedral roof. When I finished, he grunted. Cyanide, elementary but unsubtle, and a vanished menial. I abhor melodrama. This reeks of it. "Maybe," I said. "But someone stole recipes, planted evidence, and poisoned a rival. That's not melodrama. It's multitasking." He ignored me, as usual. "Archie, you will locate this Mortimer Vale. Do not speak to him yet. Merely observe. His conduct will tell me whether he is an instrument or an architect." "Sure. Anything else?" "Yes. Instruct Fritz to lock the spice cabinet." That one made me pause. "You think someone might try to poison you?" Wolfe opened his eyes, dark and steady. "No. But temptation is the forerunner of folly. I will not risk either." And just like that, the house felt a little less safe. The air thickened with the scent of suspicion, stronger than oregano, harder to wash out. I didn't know yet who was behind the recipe theft or the poisoned rival, but I had a feeling the next course was going to be served cold, and it wasn't going to be dessert. I found Mortimer Vale exactly where a man with his brand of poison usually lingers. Someplace dim, expensive, and thick with self-importance. The kind of lounge where the bartender knows the names of every critic in the city and their favorite gin. Vale sat at the far end of the bar, framed by a soft glow that tried too hard to flatter him. He was tall, thin in the way that suggested malnutrition by vanity, and had the expression of a man who considered his opinions a public service. I took a seat 2 stools away and ordered a bourbon. Vale noticed me, because men like that always notice who notices them. It's an occupational reflex. He gave me a brief glance, half curiosity, half superiority, then went back to studying the amber liquid in his glass as if it held the next chapter of his career. He didn't speak, and I didn't push. Wolfe had said observe, not engage, and that meant playing shadow until I saw something worth reporting. Vale finally fished a folded envelope from his jacket, read it once more, then tore it neatly into quarters and dropped it in the ashtray. That was interesting. Not the tearing, that's ordinary. But the neatness. Every motion measured. No haste, no heat. Guilt doesn't act that calmly. I waited until he left, then retrieved the scraps before the bartender cleared them away. They didn't offer much. Just a sliver of stationery from Le Régent, with Etienne Leclerc's signature at the bottom of what must have been an invitation. I pocketed the fragments and followed Vale out into the night. He took a cab uptown to an address that turned out to be a brownstone of his own, a modest one compared to Wolfe's fortress, but in the same league. He unlocked his door with the relaxed air of a man who's never been followed and disappeared inside. I made a note of the address and left, because Wolfe had no patience for narratives that skipped ahead without evidence. When I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe was in the plant rooms upstairs, among the orchids. I found him lecturing Theodore on the humidity levels as if the flowers were a jury and the verdict hung in the balance. He saw me and frowned, which was his way of saying, "You may speak, but only if it's worth my ears." "Vale's alive, smug and organized," I reported. "He met someone from Le Régent recently, Leclerc to be exact. Tore up the letter, but I salvaged the signature. No sign of nerves or guilt." "That, Archie," Wolfe said, "is precisely what concerns me. Guilt, properly applied, has weight. To appear unburdened is a choice. Maybe he's innocent." He sniffed. "Innocence as a state of being is neither natural nor sustainable." He turned back to the orchids. "Did you note the time of his movements?" I gave him the details, from the bar to the brownstone. He nodded once, satisfied. "Good," You will return there tomorrow morning. I wish to know his schedule, whom he meets, where he goes. Something has bound Vale, Leclerc, and Perrin together beyond recipes. Any theories? Several. None fit. He paused. Until they do, I will not embarrass myself with conjecture. That was Wolfe speak, for I'm interested but not yet ready to gloat. I left him to his flowers and found Fritz in the kitchen. He had the radio on low and was chopping herbs with the kind of precision you only see in surgeons or saints. Bad business, this, he murmured when I told him the latest. A chef, a critic, and a corpse. It is sacrilege. Yeah, I said, but profitable sacrilege if we can solve it. The next morning, I was back outside Vale's brownstone by 8. He emerged 10 minutes later in a charcoal suit, carrying a briefcase that didn't match his shoes, a detail Wolfe would have loved. He walked to a nearby cafe and met a woman. She was elegant in that low-flash way that suggested money and nerves. Silk scarf, dark glasses, posture like a question mark. They talked for 10 minutes, Vale doing most of the listening. When she left, he stayed behind, ordered another coffee, and made a phone call. I couldn't catch the words, but I caught the tone. Clipped, sharp, final. He ended it by saying, "Then it's done," and left cash on the table. By noon, I was back reporting to Wolfe, who was in mid-lunch himself. Braised duck with an expression of such serenity that I felt guilty interrupting. Vale's meeting got his attention. "Describe the woman," he said between bites. I did. Everything I'd noticed, down to the perfume that lingered after she left. Wolfe's eyes half closed, calculating. "Jasmine and bergamot," he murmured. "Expensive, intimate. It is possible the lady is Clara Vance." "The sous chef?" I asked. "She would have reason," he said. "Loyalty to Leclerc, fear of scandal, affection, or jealousy. You will confirm." He gestured to the phone. "Call Saul Panzer. Ask him to locate Peter Krosky, the vanished dishwasher. I would have him found before the day's end." I did as told. Saul, being Saul, said he'd call me within 6 hours with a location. When he promised that kind of turnaround, he delivered. By late afternoon, Wolfe and I were both in the office when the call came. Saul's voice was calm as ever. "Got your man, Archie. Krosky's working under another name, Pete Cross, at a diner in Brooklyn. Quiet, clean record, but he's been paid in cash. Looks scared of his own shadow." "Hold him," I said. "We'll come." Wolfe grunted, a sound that translated to, "You will go. I will remain where civilization resides." The diner was small, the kind that smelled like bacon, coffee, and resignation. Krosky saw me the second I walked in and turned pale enough to make me feel like a tax collector. I sat across from him in a booth, keeping my tone light. "Relax, Pete. I'm not here for the check, just a few questions about your old job." He tried denial, then deflection, then defeat, all in under a minute. "I didn't do nothing," he said, "but I saw something. The night before Perrin died, there was a man in Leclerc's office, late. Didn't belong there." "Who?" "I don't know his name. He wore gloves, but I saw him leave a package. Small box, white, wrapped neat. Next day, Chef Etienne tells us Perrin's dead. What happened to the box?" Krosky swallowed hard. It was gone the next morning. That was enough to raise Wolfe's eyebrows when I told him later. He didn't move, but you could see the machinery turning behind his eyes. "Archie," he said slowly, "we have been following the scent of culinary rivalry. But what if this crime is not about recipes or pride or vengeance? Then what's it about?" He smiled thinly. "The oldest motive of all, acquisition." I didn't know yet what he meant, but I knew the case had shifted flavor. And when Wolfe's appetite sharpened, someone's goose was about to be cooked. Wolfe didn't speak for a long while after my report. He just sat there, chin tucked in, eyes half closed, the shape of his head somehow radiating thought like a slow furnace. I'd seen that expression before, when he was constructing something intricate, something that started as dust and finished as trap wire. I stayed quiet. Interrupting Wolfe mid-deduction was like stepping into traffic. You might survive, but you'd look stupid doing it. Finally, he said, "Archie, when an inferior mind commits theft, it steals clumsily. But when an intelligent one does, it steals by rearrangement. Someone has not copied Leclerc's art. They've appropriated the system behind it." I took a guess. "You're saying it's not about the recipes, but the business, the menu itself, the restaurant concept, the intellectual property." He gave a small grunt. "Precisely. Recipes can be duplicated, but flavor depends upon proportion. If Perrin duplicated an entire tasting sequence, it means he had access to Leclerc's complete portfolio, not fragments. That implies partnership, collusion, or espionage. That was Wolfe for someone inside Le Régent sold the goods. He gestured toward the phone. "Get Leclerc. Ask him to come this evening, discreetly." I did, and by 8 o'clock, Etienne Leclerc was back in the brownstone, looking like he'd been running on espresso and guilt since we'd last met. Fritz escorted him in, wearing a look halfway between sympathy and professional curiosity. Wolfe didn't rise, of course, but he did nod, a rare courtesy. "Mr. Leclerc," he said, "you have been maligned, framed, and possibly used as a weapon. Sit. You will tell me every individual who had access to your new menu before its debut, both in your kitchen and beyond it." Leclerc sat, twisting his hat like a towel. There were only a few. Myself, Clara Vance. She assisted with final tastings. Julian March, our maitre d', who handled presentation notes, and, well, Mr. Vale. He had dined at the restaurant twice before the official launch. I invited him for a preview. That detail made Wolfe's brows rise a millimeter. "You offered your creations to a critic before unveiling them publicly?" "It was customary," Leclerc said weakly. "He had praised us before, I thought." "You thought he could be controlled by flattery," Wolfe interrupted. "A miscalculation. Critics thrive on immunity." I was leaning against the wall, watching Leclerc crumble under Wolfe's voice. "You didn't keep a copy of your notes?" I asked. He shook his head. "Only one version existed, in my office safe. Recipes, plating diagrams, timing sheets. It was locked. Until someone unlocked it," I said. "Our missing dishwasher mentioned seeing a man in your office with a white box." Leclerc's eyes widened. "A box? My God. That must have been the night, but no one should have been there. The staff had gone." "Except the sous chef," Wolfe murmured. Leclerc frowned. "Clara? She's loyal." "Loyalty," Wolfe said, "is a delicate sauce. A touch too much heat and it curdles." Leclerc started to protest, but Wolfe lifted a hand. "Enough. Archie, tomorrow you will return to Le Régent. Speak privately with Miss Vance. Do not accuse her, simply inquire. If she is innocent, she will be indignant. If she is guilty, she will be careful. Either state is instructive." The next morning I followed orders. Clara was already in the kitchen when I arrived, her hair tied back, eyes sharper than the knives behind her. "You again?" she said. "Looking for dinner reservations or trouble?" "Neither," I said. "Just conversation. You worked late the night before the recipes went missing." Her jaw tightened. "Who told you that?" "Your dishwasher. Don't worry, he's not writing memoirs. He just saw someone in the office that night." For a moment her knife paused mid-slice. Then she resumed, calm as clockwork. "People come and go in a kitchen, Mr. Goodwin. It's not a monastery." "Maybe not, but the confessions are interesting," I said. "Tell me, did Perrin ever visit Le Régent?" She looked up at me, eyes steady. "Once, a month ago. He and Leclerc used to be partners. Years back, didn't you know?" I hadn't. That was the kind of thing Wolfe would have wrung out of her in 30 seconds, but I made a mental note instead. So they had history. More than history, they had ambition. She dropped the knife, hands on the counter. If you're looking for guilt, don't start with me. Look at Julian March. He handles the reservations, the private tastings, the finances. He'd sell his mother's recipe for a headline. That was something worth carrying home. I left before she threw me out. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was reading the paper with that serene disgust he reserved for journalism. I filled him in, and he closed his eyes. Leclerc and Perrin were partners, he repeated. A vital omission. That changes everything. Perrin's death is not the conclusion, it is the correction. Meaning, he opened them again. Meaning that whoever killed him was tidying loose ends. Theft alone rarely provokes murder, but exposure does. He rang for Fritz. Inform Saul Panzer that he will now locate Mr. Julian March. We require a discreet conversation before midnight. By 10, Saul had him. March was less elegant out of uniform, sweaty, nervous, and wearing guilt like cologne. Wolfe didn't waste time. Mr. March, he said, you have facilitated theft, deception, and possibly murder. I advise you to speak plainly before your survival depends on your silence. March tried denial, then wit, then sweat. I didn't poison Perrin, he stammered. I only made the introductions. Vale wanted exclusivity. He promised to make Perrin the toast of the town if he could publish his new menu first. Perrin paid me to get the notes from Leclerc's safe. I hired the dishwasher. That's all. Not quite, Wolfe said. Theft, yes. Betrayal, yes. But someone decided Perrin's continued existence was inconvenient. March looked from Wolfe to me, his mouth trembling. Vale. He said Perrin had become reckless. He said if I kept quiet, I'd be protected. And so you did, Wolfe said softly. Until now. March buried his head in his hands. You don't understand. Perrin was going to expose Vale's blackmail scheme, selling fabricated scandals to ruined chefs. He was going to publish proof. That was when it clicked. I could see Wolfe's eyes narrow, the final piece dropping into place. Archie, he said, call Mr. Vale, invite him here tomorrow evening. Tell him we have a proposition concerning his professional integrity. I didn't need to ask what kind of proposition. Wolfe's voice had that still dangerous calm, the kind that meant the game was almost over and the checkmate was already written. The next day came heavy with that kind of quiet that only means something's about to snap. Even Fritz was subdued at breakfast, stirring eggs like a man trying not to disturb fate. Wolfe said nothing, but that was the loudest thing in the room. His silence had gravity. You could almost hear thoughts slotting into place like weights on a scale. By 5 that evening, the brownstone was set the way Wolfe liked it for confrontation. Everything precise, formal, inevitable. The air was too still. The desk lamp cast its narrow circle, the orchid trays gleamed faintly against the walls, and the red leather chair at the far end waited like a throne that expected repentance. I had called Mortimer Vale and told him Wolfe had a proposition regarding the culinary scandal that had made him a temporary celebrity. Vale had accepted smoothly, too smoothly, the way men do when they think they control the stage. At 7 sharp, Fritz showed him in. Vale was wearing the same confidence he'd had at the bar, only more polished now that he thought he was the guest of honor. His coat was impeccable, his tie a subtle gray silk, and he brought with him the faint odor of self-satisfaction, spiced, aged, and expensive. Mr. Wolfe, he said, bowing slightly, I've admired your intellect from afar. I'm flattered you've taken an interest in the culinary world. Sit, Wolfe said, not moving. Admiration is a condiment, Mr. Vale. Use it sparingly. I gave Vale a chair where Wolfe could watch his face under the lamplight. He smiled. The kind of smile critics wear when they're about to write a bad review but want to seem polite first. "I understand you have information about the regrettable death of Gustave Perrin," he said. "A tragedy, though perhaps an inevitable one." That earned him a small grunt from Wolfe. "Inevitable? Death is inevitable, Mr. Vale. Murder is elective." Vale chuckled softly. "You believe it was murder?" "I believe," Wolfe said, "that Gustave Perrin's demise was convenient to precisely one man in this city, yourself. He had threatened to expose your arrangement with Julian March. A critic who manufactures scandal for profit cannot survive exposure. So you silenced him neatly, and then allowed suspicion to fall upon the chef whose name you had already ruined in print." Vale didn't flinch. "You overestimate my reach, Mr. Wolfe. I review food, not people." "You review ambition," Wolfe countered, "and you harvest it. Leclerc's creations were stolen, not by your hand, but by your orchestration. March procured the material, Perrin used it, and you held the pen that turned theft into accusation. When Perrin wavered, you ended the partnership." I watched Vale closely. His jaw worked once, like he was chewing on his own defense, but he said nothing. Wolfe leaned forward an inch, a monumental gesture for him. The method was elegant. "You knew Perrin's weakness. He drank. You chose a poison soluble in alcohol but unstable in heat, so it could not be traced to the kitchen. Cyanide in creme de cassis, fatal in seconds, undetectable after minutes." Vale's eyes flicked to me, then back to Wolfe. "You have imagination, sir." "I have reason," Wolfe said, "and reason requires only motive, means, and opportunity. All three are yours, but I will not hand you to the police. I detest their clumsiness. I will, however, correct the record you polluted." He gestured to me, and I handed Vale a manila envelope. Inside was a single page, typed neatly, signed, dated. Vale glanced at it and paled. It was a statement, a confession written in his style but with Wolfe's words, admitting fabrication, collusion, and culpability in Perrin's death by negligence. "This is absurd," Vale said. "You expect me to sign this?" "I expect you to read it carefully," Wolfe said. "Then you will sign it, because you will have no choice." "Archie?" I went to the desk drawer and pulled out a small white box. Clean, sealed, the same kind Krosky had described. I placed it on the table between them. Vale's eyes fixed on it like it was a ghost. "Recognize it?" I asked. He didn't answer, but his fingers twitched. Wolfe's tone deepened. "You see, Mr. Vale, your attention to detail betrayed you. You instructed March to use a particular type of gift box for the stolen recipes. Unfortunately for you, one remained. I found it in Leclerc's safe this afternoon, overlooked and unopened. Inside were 2 ampules, one labeled cassis essence, one without. The unlabeled one we had analyzed. Cyanide, identical to that used in Perrin's poisoning." Vale's color drained. "That proves nothing." "It proves everything," Wolfe said softly, "especially since you are the only one who handled that packaging. March's statement corroborates it. The police will not have to prove intent, merely possession." Vale rose abruptly, the calm stripped from his voice. "You're bluffing. You wouldn't dare—" "Sit," Wolfe said. He didn't raise his voice, but the air obeyed. "If you leave now, you will be in custody before midnight. Sign that confession, and I will see that it reaches the newspaper before the precinct." Vale stared at him, trembling, then snatched the pen. He scrawled his name, jerky and furious, and slammed the paper back on the table. "You sanctimonious glutton," he spat. "You think you've restored justice, but all you've done is feed your vanity." "Perhaps," Wolfe said. "But justice, unlike vanity, nourishes." Vale stormed out, the door slamming behind him. Fritz, who had been standing in the hallway with the air of a man prepared to disarm a bomb, reappeared and closed it quietly. For a long time, Wolfe didn't move. Then he exhaled and leaned back, eyelids lowering again. "Archie," he said, "inform Mr. Leclerc that his name will be cleared by morning. Send Mr. March's statement to Inspector Kramer. He'll want a trophy." I gathered the papers. "And the confession?" "That," he said, "goes to the Gazette. Let public appetite consume what it has been fed." Fritz entered with a tray, wine and roast pigeon. The smell filled the room. Wolfe's expression softened by degrees until he looked, if not content, at least restored. "Tell me," I said, pouring his wine, "was there ever a moment you weren't sure?" He opened one eye. "Doubt is the yeast of understanding, Archie, but once it rises, one must bake promptly." I chuckled. So Vale got what was coming. "Indeed," Wolfe said. "He served poison to the public, and now he will be digested by it." That was the closest Wolfe ever got to gloating. Dinner was served, order restored, and the brownstone breathed again. The city would feast on scandal tomorrow, but inside those walls all was calm, the smell of food, the hum of thought, and the faint satisfaction of a case cooked to perfection. The confession went to the Gazette that same night. I typed up a clean copy, sealed it, and sent it by messenger with instructions to hold it until 9 the next morning. By the time I returned, Wolfe had finished dinner and was already in that post-meal state of benign paralysis. Eyes half closed, a small frown of digestion and satisfaction mixed together. "Vale won't sleep," I said. "Neither will Leclerc, I bet." Wolfe murmured, "Nor will Inspector Kramer, once the confession reaches him. He will storm in here before noon, red-faced and voluble, to accuse me of interfering with due process. Bring him beer when he does. It will shorten the visit." That was his version of light conversation. I left him to his orchids and went to bed, but sleep came reluctantly. The image of Vale signing his name, hand shaking, eyes burning, stuck with me. Something in it had felt unfinished, as though he wasn't surrendering but deferring. Morning brought the Gazette headline: "Culinary critic confesses to fraud and involvement in chef's death." Wolfe didn't read the paper. He devoured it, slow and savoring, until the corners grew soft under his fingers. "Justice, Archie," he said finally, "is most satisfying when it offends the unjust." I was about to agree when the doorbell rang. Fritz answered, and I heard a voice that made Wolfe sigh before the man even entered. Inspector Kramer stomped in like a thundercloud with a badge. "Confession," he barked. "Yours?" "Hardly," Wolfe said. "I wrote it, but the hand that signed it was guilty." Kramer's glare could have peeled varnish. "You're telling me Mortimer Vale confessed under coercion?" Wolfe shrugged. "He confessed under logic. I merely applied it." Kramer slammed the folded copy of the Gazette onto the desk. "He's dead." That stopped the air cold. Even Fritz, standing behind me, let out a small gasp. Wolfe's brows rose, slow and deliberate. "Dead. Found in his apartment this morning," Kramer said. "Gas. Windows sealed. Stove open. Suicide note says he couldn't face disgrace. Convenient, huh? Especially since the forensics team found no trace of cyanide or ampules anywhere. No box either." Wolfe leaned back, eyes narrowing. "That is unfortunate." "Unfortunate?" Kramer snorted. "You cornered him, humiliated him, and now he's dead. That's beyond unfortunate. That's obstruction." "Rubbish," Wolfe said. "If he chose extinction rather than exposure, it is not my doing." Kramer jabbed a finger toward him. "If I find out you held anything back—" "You won't," Wolfe interrupted, calm as marble. "Because I haven't. However," his gaze sharpened, "the absence of the box is telling. Either Vale destroyed it before he died, or someone retrieved it after. A corpse seldom tidies evidence." Kramer grunted. "You think someone else was in that apartment?" "Unquestionably." He left, growling threats about warrants and headlines, and the door shut behind him with the finality of a judge's gavel. I turned to Wolfe. "So it's not over?" "No," he said. "The death of Vale completes the chain of guilt, but not the logic. He was a manipulator, not a murderer. His suicide, if it was suicide, protects someone else." "March," I guessed. "Too frightened and too poor." "No, someone subtler, someone with access after Vale's exposure." "Clara." His eyes opened fully, and for Wolfe that was like a pistol cocking. "Fetch her," he said, "at once." By noon, Clara Vance was seated where Vale had been the night before, her composure taut but not cracked. She wore black, though no one had declared mourning. "I heard about Vale," she said. "Poetic justice, maybe." Wolfe studied her in silence. Then, softly, "Miss Vance, poetic justice requires an author. Tell me, why did you visit him yesterday morning?" Her mouth parted, then closed again. "Who told you that?" "Observation," Wolfe said. "You were seen, and your perfume preceded you." She faltered, then folded. "He called me, said he wanted to fix things, said Leclerc could be spared if I helped him disappear. I went. He was alive when I left." Wolfe's tone was almost gentle. "And the box?" Her eyes darted to the desk where it had been. "I took it," she said faintly. I thought if I destroyed it, no one could prove anything. I didn't know he'd..." "Die," Wolfe finished. "Or be killed." She blinked hard, confusion and fear flickering across her face. "You think someone else?" "I think," Wolfe said, "you are not the last person to see him alive. Someone followed you. Someone who needed that box intact." I leaned forward. "Who else knew you went there?" She swallowed. "Julian March. I told him. He said to be careful." Wolfe sighed, a deep, resonant sound. "Archie, call Mr. March. Tell him to attend this evening. He will, of course, imagine it's to settle accounts." And it is. She looked between us, pale. "You're saying he?" "Patience," Wolfe murmured. "Guilt ripens quickly when exposed to heat." As she left, I caught Wolfe staring at the newspaper headline again, the faintest crease between his brows. "Funny," I said. "You've solved the case twice, and it's still breathing." He gave me a thin smile. "Because, my dear Archie, truth is not static. It adjusts itself to our appetites. Tonight, we dine on it." And somewhere out there, I knew, someone else was already preparing the table. March showed up just after 7, right on time, which was interesting all by itself. Guilty men arrive early or late, never punctual. Fritz led him in, and March looked more polished than the last time. Pressed suit, clean shave, confidence painted on like lacquer. He must have read about Vale's suicide in the morning paper and decided the storm had passed. "Mr. Wolfe," he said, smiling like a man offering a business card to a firing squad. "You wanted to see me?" "Yes," Wolfe said mildly, his hands folded over his middle. "Sit down. I dislike craning my neck upward. It distorts the conversation." March sat. I watched from the corner, notebook closed, because Wolfe didn't need shorthand now. He needed a confession. "Mr. March," Wolfe began, "you were instrumental in the theft of Leclerc's recipes. You admitted as much last night. But what concerns me now is Vale's death." March blinked. "The suicide?" "Your term, not mine," Wolfe said. "I call it an untidy conclusion. Vale was not a man inclined to remorse. He lived by control and calculation. Men of that breed do not surrender, they bargain. Yet he left no message of guilt, only despair. It does not fit." March's voice wavered. "You think he was, what, murdered?" "Indeed," Wolfe said. "And you helped arrange it." That took the smile off. "That's ridiculous. I haven't seen Vale since the night he—" "Stop," Wolfe said, not loud but firm enough to end the lie before it was fully born. You saw him yesterday morning, Miss Vance told us. She also told us you advised her to be careful. Curious advice from an accomplice who claimed to be finished. March's mouth opened, then shut again. His knuckles whitened against the chair. I told her to stay away from him, he said finally. He'd called her, said he had something to give her, something that would fix everything. I told her not to go. But she did, Wolfe said. And you followed her. You arrived after she left, discovered Vale alive and saw the box. On his desk. You knew that box could prove your role. So you took it, and when he objected, you silenced him. Not poison this time, no. Gas. Efficient, quiet, and poetic. That's insane, March burst out, half rising. You have no proof. Wolfe's eyes didn't move. Proof? I require only coherence. The police will find your fingerprints on Vale's kitchen valve and his door latch. The prints of a nervous man who thought wiping them would suffice. You lack the mind to erase consequence. March's breath came quick and shallow. You can't know that. I can deduce it, Wolfe said, and for a second the room felt smaller, the air dense with inevitability. The box is gone. You destroyed it, but Vale's lighter was found on the floor beside him, a silver Dunhill engraved from Le Régent's anniversary banquet. Yours. March froze. The blood drained from his face so cleanly it was almost beautiful. He looked from Wolfe to me, searching for mercy and finding none. You planted that, he shouted, but the panic cracked his voice. Enough, Wolfe said quietly. Archie, call Inspector Kramer. March slumped back in the chair, shaking his head. You'll never make it stick, he muttered. No one will believe. They will, Wolfe interrupted. Because you are exactly what the public understands, a greedy fool caught in another man's game. Vale was clever, but you were convenient. A servant who mistook proximity for power. Fritz appeared silently in the doorway, and behind him came the sound of a car pulling up outside. Kramer's timing, as precise as Wolfe predicted. March didn't look up as the inspector entered. He was already finished. Kramer took one look at him and groaned. Goodwin, tell me this one's breathing. Barely, I said. Then I can charge him, Kramer said. For once, Wolfe, your brand of law doesn't ruin mine. On the contrary, Wolfe murmured. It completes it. Kramer cuffed March and led him out, muttering about paperwork and ulcers. The door shut. The room felt calm again, like the brownstone had exhaled. I looked at Wolfe. So it was March all along. From the moment he lied with fluency, Wolfe said, innocent stumbles, guilt rehearses. Fritz came forward with a small nod. Dinner is ready, sir. Wolfe allowed himself a thin smile. At last, order is restored. The palate detests corruption as much as the mind. He lifted his glass, and the golden reflection of the wine danced across his face. Justice, Archie, he said, like a fine sauce, demands timing. Serve it too soon, it's raw. Too late, bitter. And as I poured my own, I figured that summed it up neatly. The city could keep its headlines and its noise. For Wolfe, the case was finished, the world balanced again, and the brownstone, once more, was the quietest, safest place in New York. For a few days after March's arrest, the brownstone went back to its version of normal, which, in Wolfe's world, meant silence, order, and the gentle tyranny of routine. Fritz's meals regained their rhythm, the orchids resumed their endless bloom cycles, and Wolfe retreated into books and beef consommé with equal discipline. You'd never know a murder, 2 scandals, and a suicide had unfolded under his supervision. But routine never lasts long around Wolfe, not when the world outside insists on mistaking him for an oracle. The first sign came on the 3rd morning after March's confession. I was halfway through my coffee when the phone rang. The voice on the other end belonged to Inspector Kramer, and it sounded like gravel rolling downhill. Goodwin, he growled. "Tell Wolfe to keep his nose out of the papers. We've got complications." "That word covers a lot of ground," I said. "Narrow it down." "March is dead," Kramer said flatly. "Poisoned. In his cell." The cup stopped halfway to my mouth. "You're joking." "Do I sound like it? Cyanide, same as Perrin. Fast and clean. No idea how it got past lock and key, but you tell Wolfe. This mess just got bigger." He hung up before I could reply. When I relayed the news, Wolfe didn't react for a long time. His eyes stayed closed, fingers steepled beneath his chin. Only the smallest twitch in his jaw betrayed thought. "Cyanide again," he murmured. "Elegant symmetry, but no convenience. The sequence must end somewhere, and it hasn't." "You think someone tied up loose ends?" I asked. "I think," he said, "that someone is orchestrating the aftermath." I could tell he was already running through names and motives in his head. Clara Vance was cleared publicly. Leclerc had returned to his kitchen, lauded as a victim of deception. Vale and March were dead. That left the shadow behind both of them, someone who understood the mechanics of power but preferred others to wield it. Wolfe reached for his glass of water, sipped, and set it down precisely on the coaster. "Archie, fetch Leclerc. Tell him I require his presence this afternoon. There is an omission in his narrative that now demands attention." Leclerc arrived, looking better fed, but worse rested. He was wearing success like a suit a size too small. The restaurant's reopening had made him something of a minor celebrity. Still, his hands trembled when he sat down. "Mr. Wolfe," he said, "I owe you everything. My name, my career. Everything is restored." "Restoration is only as durable as its foundation," Wolfe said. "And yours, I fear, is eroding. Tell me, Mr. Leclerc, how much insurance did Le Régent carry against reputation loss?" Leclerc blinked. "Insurance? You mean business indemnity? Enough, I suppose. My partner arranged it before the scandal. A silent investor. It was his idea." "Ah," Wolfe said softly. "A silent investor. And his name?" Leclerc hesitated. "I signed an agreement. Not to reveal it. Feuille. You will now." After a moment of tortured silence, Leclerc exhaled. It was Edmund Vale, Mortimer's brother. That landed like a stone in still water. Wolfe's expression didn't change, but his voice did. It sharpened, every syllable precise. "So the critic's brother financed the restaurant whose chef his sibling later destroyed. Convenient." Leclerc looked bewildered. "I didn't know they were related until after the review. When Perrin died, Edmund vanished from correspondence. I assumed he wished to distance himself." "More likely," Wolfe said. "He wished to profit from the aftermath. Perrin's death, the scandal, even the restoration of your name, all arranged to fluctuate stock, reputation, and insurance claims. Mortimer played the visible villain. Edmund reaped the invisible reward." I whistled low. "And March?" "A tool," Wolfe said. "Disposable, as all intermediaries are. He knew enough to be dangerous, so Edmund silenced him, cleanly, within custody, where the act would appear impossible and therefore unquestioned." Leclerc's voice shook. "You think he'll come for me next?" "No," Wolfe said. "He believes the game concluded. But he has miscalculated one detail. Me." The phone rang again before I could ask what he meant. Fritz answered and handed it to me. A clipped male voice said, "Tell Mr. Wolfe that he's been very thorough. Too thorough." Then the line went dead. I met Wolfe's gaze. "You heard?" He nodded once, slowly. "Edmund Vale, clearly. A man who tidies his affairs personally." He rose, not quickly but with a sense of inevitability. "Archie, we shall not wait for him to act. Kramer must be informed, and we must have company this evening. I will not have the brownstone defiled again by intrusion." As I reached for the phone, he added, almost gently, "It seems, Archie, that our menu is not yet complete. There remains one final course to serve." And the way he said it, quiet, deliberate, made me feel that whatever was coming, it wouldn't be eaten cold. It would be served with precision, and this time the appetite for justice would have no restraint at all. Wolfe spent the rest of the afternoon in that peculiar stillness of his, the kind that made the air feel charged, like a storm building behind walls instead of clouds. He didn't eat lunch, which meant the universe had tilted. Fritz tried twice to tempt him with cold chicken and mustard sauce, and both times he waved it off without a word. That alone told me how seriously he was taking Edmund Vale. I'd already called Kramer, and to my surprise, he didn't bark or threaten arrest this time. He listened. "I'll send 2 men to sit across the street," he said. "But if this Vale shows, Wolfe better keep his temper in that chair of his." When I told Wolfe, he grunted approval. "Kramer's intelligence fluctuates, but tonight it is serviceable. Leave the door unlatched, Archie. Our guest will prefer subtlety." "Meaning you expect him to walk right in?" "Meaning he already has," Wolfe said. "Men like Edmund Vale do not hide behind threats. They perform them." He wasn't wrong. At 8:30, the doorbell didn't ring. It simply opened. Edmund Vale stepped into the office like he'd been invited. Tall, sleek, dressed in mourning black that looked more ceremonial than sincere. His resemblance to his late brother was faint. Same narrow face, but colder, more contained. He moved like someone who measured space before occupying it. "Mr. Wolfe," he said, his voice as smooth as a chilled sauce. "You've cost me quite a bit of money." Wolfe didn't rise. "Then you're here to recover it, I assume." "I'm here," Vale said, "to close accounts." He turned his gaze to me, the corner of his mouth twitching. "You, I imagine, are the errand boy." "That's right," I said pleasantly. "I run the errands and the mouth. Wolfe runs the rest." He gave a faint smile, appreciating the line. Then he faced Wolfe again. "You've been industrious. You've stripped my brother's name, destroyed my partners, and dragged my business into police hands, all to satisfy that vanity of yours." "Justice," Wolfe corrected. "I indulge vanity only after dessert." Vale's smile thinned. "You talk like a man who believes words can protect him." "They can," Wolfe said. "And they will. You see, Mr. Vale, I anticipated your visit. The police are stationed outside, and I have already supplied them with your financial records, courtesy of a bank statement forwarded by a cautious insurers. The chain of accounts linking your investment to La Région's policy is complete." For the first time, Edmund's composure faltered. Just a flicker, but Wolfe caught it. "You took out indemnity under Leclerc's name," Wolfe continued, "to profit from scandal. You used your brother's position to stage the theft, the review, and Perrin's death. March was your errand boy, yours, not Vale's. When I exposed him, you had him killed to seal the breach. A tidy enterprise." Vale's voice dropped half an octave. "You can't prove that." "You mistake me for the police," Wolfe said. "Proof is their occupation. Certainty is mine." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Vale's hand slipped into his coat pocket, and I tensed, ready to dive or swing depending on what came out. But it wasn't a gun. It was a small, white envelope. He tossed it on the desk. "Your certainty," he said. "A confession, typed, unsigned. It will appear tomorrow in every paper in the city. It exonerates Leclerc, praises your brilliance, and buries the rest in ambiguity. Consider it my peace offering." Wolfe's voice was silk over steel. "You imagine appeasement buys indulgence?" Vale leaned forward slightly. "I imagine you prefer elegance, over spectacle. Let the dead bury themselves, Mr. Wolfe. You can claim your victory and dine well for the rest of your days." I could see Wolfe's nostrils flare. Not anger, exactly, but offense of the deepest kind. "Sir," he said finally, "you mistake my appetite for compromise. I would rather starve on principle than feast on corruption." Vale straightened, eyes cold. "Then starve," he said, and turned toward the door. Before he reached it, the front bell rang again. Loud this time. Fritz appeared, nervous but steady. "Inspector Kramer," he announced. Vale froze for half a second, then smiled again, faint and resigned. "You really are thorough, Mr. Wolfe." "I cultivate consistency," Wolfe said. "Archie, show him out. To Kramer." As I escorted Vale to the front hall, he leaned close enough for me to smell the faint bitterness of cologne and contempt. "You think he won," he murmured. "But men like Nero Wolfe don't win. They just wait to lose on a grander scale." "Yeah," I said, "but we eat better while we're waiting." Kramer met us on the stoop, flanked by 2 detectives. Vale didn't resist as they took him. He just looked back once, eyes calm, as if memorizing the place that had beaten him. When I returned to the office, Wolfe was already reaching for his glass of beer. "He will attempt negotiation," he said. "He will fail. Kramer will confirm his accounts before morning." I sat across from him, letting the quiet settle. "That the end of it?" "Of course," Wolfe said. "An ending, like a meal, requires no apology, only satisfaction." He lifted the glass. "Archie, the world is a kitchen of deceit, but occasionally it serves truth. Rare, well-seasoned, and best enjoyed hot." I nodded. Outside, the sirens were fading. Inside, Fritz began setting dinner, and for the first time in days, the brownstone felt clean again. Quiet, ordered, and whole, as though nothing could disturb it, at least until the next knock on the door. Dinner that night was subdued, though Fritz outdid himself as usual. A roast capon, buttered asparagus, and a tarragon sauce that would have made even the dead reconsider staying that way. Wolfe ate methodically, saying nothing through the first 2 courses. That meant his mind was still churning, which wasn't new, but it was odd that it kept churning after the case had seemingly wrapped. When he gets quiet like that, it doesn't mean rest. It means the soil hasn't settled around the roots of his logic. When I'd cleared my plate and leaned back with coffee, he finally spoke. "Archie, you observed Mr. Vale carefully." "As carefully as you told me to," I said. "He didn't sweat, didn't blink, didn't stutter. Calm as an undertaker." Wolfe frowned. "Too calm. A man who anticipates arrest will display residue, fear, resentment, resignation. He showed none. He was playing a part, but not the one we assigned him." I raised an eyebrow. "You think he was bluffing all the way to Kramer's car?" "Not bluffing," he said, eyes narrowing. "Acting." He set his fork down. "Fetch the morning paper, yesterday's, the one with Vale's supposed suicide." I did. He flipped through the obituary page, tapping his finger against the grainy photo of Mortimer Vale. "Note the resemblance. Brothers, yes. But Edmund's bone structure, longer jaw, narrower brow. In Mortimer's last known photograph, these are inconsistent." It took me a second, then I got it. "You're saying that wasn't Mortimer Vale who died in that apartment?" "Precisely. A body found in a sealed room, the face burned by gas, identification made by personal effects. What better way for Edmund to erase the one person who could contradict his schemes than to substitute a corpse and declare it his brother? He becomes both victim and heir." I whistled low. "So he's been living as Mortimer Vale this whole time?" "Yes," Wolfe said softly. "He killed his brother, assumed his identity, and orchestrated everything that followed. The theft, the review, the murder of Perrin, the death of March. When I confronted him, I accused him of crimes as Edmund Vale. He, however, stood before me as Mortimer Vale, publicly, legally, irreproachably. He will deny the other name exists." I let that sink in. So when Kramer hauls him in tonight, he will produce documents, witnesses, and perhaps even a passport, all proving he is Mortimer Vale, Wolfe said, and Kramer, lacking the patience for subtle identity fraud, will release him. I stared. Then we're right back where we started. Not quite, Wolfe said. Now we know the shape of the deception. He rang for Fritz, who appeared instantly, concern already etched on his face. Fritz, bring me the correspondence folder from the Morning Post. When Fritz returned, Wolfe extracted a small white envelope, the same one Edmund had dropped earlier. He opened it with surgical precision, removed the folded sheet, and studied it under the lamplight. Archie, the confession he offered us was not typed on the same machine as the others used in his office. This is the work of a Remington No. 5. Vale's typist uses a Royal, distinctly different typeface. Meaning? Meaning he brought it with him, prepared, not a peace offering, insurance, a ruse to buy time. He paused, then said, "Fetch Saul Panzer. I will need him before dawn." By the time Saul arrived, the house had gone dark except for the glow of Wolfe's office lamp. Saul listened without interruption, his calm better suited to midnight crime than most priests have for confession. "You think Vale's at large already?" he asked. Wolfe nodded. "He will attempt departure tonight, likely from the docks. His holdings abroad are substantial, and his face, though similar to his brother's, will not attract suspicion once he leaves. Jurisdiction, I would prefer he not." Saul grinned faintly. "Understood. I'll start at the East River piers. If he's buying a ticket, I'll find him before the ink dries." When he was gone, Wolfe turned to me. "You will accompany Kramer at dawn to verify the arrest. Do not reveal our suspicions, simply observe whether the man in custody is indeed Edmund Vale, or his ghost." I had questions, about plans, about how the hell we'd corner a man who'd already reinvented himself. But Wolfe waved me off. "Archie, comprehension before confrontation. If Saul finds him, the truth will come to us." He said it with such quiet certainty that I almost believed justice could be summoned like coffee from Fritz's kitchen. The next morning came grey and cold. Kramer was already at the precinct when I arrived, looking 10 years older and twice as irritated. "You're not going to like this," he said before I even opened my mouth. Vale's got alibis thicker than his wallet, birth records, licenses, handwriting samples, all Mortimer's. His lawyers threatening to sue for false arrest. I kept my face straight. Wolfe expected as much. "But tell me, Inspector, does he look the same as the body you found in that apartment?" Kramer frowned. "Body was bloated and burned. Hard to tell." "Why?" "Because Wolfe doesn't think you've got Mortimer Vale. He thinks Mortimer Vale's been dead for months, and the man you're holding is his brother, Edmund." Kramer's eyes went flat. "Goodwin, if this is one of Wolfe's games—" "Not a game, just the truth, waiting for confirmation. You'll get it before breakfast." As if on cue, the precinct phone rang. Kramer answered, grunted, then shoved the receiver at me. "It's for you, your boy Panzer." Saul's voice came steady and low. "Archie, found him. East Pier, boarding a freighter under the name Edmund Vaughan. Just left his car. Papers match Edmund Vale. Looks calm as a priest." I met Kramer's gaze. "Inspector, you might want to send a car to the docks. Looks like your man's about to disappear twice." The next 2 hours were chaos. Sirens, shouting, the sting of salt air and engine smoke. By the time we reached the pier, Saul already had him boxed in between a line of crates and 2 officers. Edmund Vale, or Mortimer, whichever name he thought he was wearing, stood composed, hands folded, as if caught waiting for dessert. When Wolfe arrived an hour later, escorted by Fritz and disdain for police cars, he simply looked at Vale and said, "Mr. Vale, you are an able actor. Unfortunately, the stage has caught fire." Vale's smile didn't waver, but something behind it broke. And when Kramer pulled the papers from his coat, the ones bearing the name Edmund Vaughan, The performance ended. Back in the brownstone that evening, Wolfe ate with quiet satisfaction. "Justice, Archie," he said between bites, "requires not merely discovery, but correction. The difference between a clue and a conclusion is digestion." I laughed. "And I suppose you've finished this one." He looked up from his plate, eyes half closed. "Completely. Now, Fritz, the pear tart." And that was it. The curtain falling on a crime cooked in ambition, served cold and finished hot. Another night, another victory for the man who never left his chair, and the fool who ran his errands. The day after Vale's arrest dawned clear, cold, and sharp, the kind of morning that felt scrubbed clean after too much noise. New York, for once, seemed to pause between breaths. The papers had already plastered Wolfe's name across their front pages again. "Brilliant recluse exposes, imposter critic in web of murder and greed." Kramer would grind his teeth over that for a week, but even he had admitted, grudgingly, that Wolfe's instincts had landed the final blow. By the time I reached the office, Wolfe was at his desk, a fresh orchid in his buttonhole, and the morning sunlight warming his bulk like he was photosynthesizing logic. He had his hands steepled and eyes closed, but he wasn't asleep. That man's mind never rested, just idled between victories. "Kramer called," I said, hanging my hat. "Vale, Edmund Vale, or Mortimer, or whoever he wanted to be this week. Finally confessed. Seems he cracked in the holding cell after realizing his lawyer couldn't explain why Mortimer's dental records didn't match his own." Wolfe opened one eye. "Ah, the jawbone. Nature's most incriminating signature. He's talking plenty now. Said he killed his brother 6 months ago, took his name and used the identity to launder every grudge and deal he could find. The insurance scheme, the recipe theft, the critic racket. It all fit neatly into his plan. Perrin's death was just the final course." Wolfe nodded once. "A plan dependent on resemblance and cowardice. He assumed no one would question grief wrapped in sophistication. Vanity, Archie, is always the accomplice. Kramer also said he'll file the paperwork to clear Leclerc's record officially. The chef's back in business, and Clara Vance already gave a notice. Says she's going to Paris. Probably for her sanity." Wolfe grunted. If she had any to begin with, she would not have worked for a man who named sauces like children. I smiled. "So that's it? Case closed? Reputations repaired? New York spared another poisoned entree?" "Hardly," Wolfe said, finally sitting upright. "Closure is for fools who confuse resolution with understanding. What have we learned?" "Not to eat anywhere that isn't Fritz's kitchen," I said. "Besides that," he said dryly. I shrugged. "That greed and pride make a nasty pairing. That men like Vale, both of them use genius to ruin, not create." "Better," Wolfe said, "but incomplete. We have learned that deception, like a fine meal, requires presentation. Edmund, Vale's greatest crime was aesthetic. He mistook imitation for mastery. Every act of his life was a performance for applause, not for truth. When applause ceased, he destroyed the audience." He paused, looking toward the window where the winter light was shifting across the curtains. "Justice, Archie, is not balance, it is digestion, the process by which the indigestible is removed from the system. The city is purged of him now." I couldn't argue with that, though the metaphor made me glad I'd finished breakfast earlier. The front bell rang, and Fritz appeared a moment later with a small envelope. "For you, sir, hand-delivered from Le Régent." Wolfe opened it, read the short note, and handed it to me. "For restoring my name and my faith in creation, please accept a token of gratitude. Tonight's dinner, prepared by my own hand, delivered to your kitchen. With respect, Etienne Leclerc." Fritz's eyes lit up like Christmas. Wolfe's didn't. He folded the note and placed it aside. "No," he said. "Return it." Compliments to Mr. Leclerc, but I do not eat indebtedness. Fritz sighed but nodded, disappearing with the letter. I gave Wolfe a look. You're turning down a free meal from one of the best chefs in the city. He probably prayed over every truffle. Wolfe closed his eyes again, serene. I do not barter my appetite, Archie. When I dine, it is on my own terms. Gratitude, like seasoning, must be applied sparingly. I leaned back in my chair, grinning. That's you, unbribable, unmovable, and ungrateful. You sure you're human? He almost smiled. Humanity, Archie, is a vulgar necessity. I tolerate it because you provide conversation. That was as close to affection as Wolfe ever got. The afternoon light faded, and Fritz began the slow percussion of dinner prep downstairs. The brownstone was calm again, sealed against chaos like a fortress of logic and good taste. I glanced at Wolfe, motionless behind his desk, the faintest curl of contentment at the corner of his mouth. He'd done it again, without leaving his chair, without raising his voice, without so much as smudging a cufflink. The city could call it luck, or genius, or arrogance, but I knew better. It was just Nero Wolfe doing what he did best, restoring order in a world that kept trying to spoil the recipe. As the first scent of Fritz's cooking drifted up the stairs, I turned off the desk lamp and said, "Well, boss, justice is served." He didn't open his eyes. Not served, Archie. Consumed. And that was that. Another meal, another mystery finished, another night when the brownstone, our small, perfect world, was exactly as it should be, full of silence, logic, and the faint hum of satisfaction that came only when Nero Wolfe had eaten the truth and found it to his taste, 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 found it to his taste.